Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the On Track, Off Track podcast. My name's Jared Colow. I'm here with Victor Oporto-Gola. We had some technical difficulties last time we tried to record this, so in the spirit of disclosure, this is the second time we're recording this podcast, so we do know some of each other's answers for these questions, but nevertheless, it's some interesting discussion to come. We're going to be covering the Detroit GP, where they held IndyCar and IMSA in this last weekend. We're going to be discussing MotoGP at Mugello. Most importantly, in the motorsport segment, we're going to be discussing our predictions for next year's F1 driver market as everything develops with the recent news about Ocon and Perez that we'll get to a little bit later on. Then we're going to be discussing the Geneva Auto Show, talking about the retirement of the Geneva Auto Show. And then lastly, we're going to be doing a draft of the best cars that come from the Geneva Auto Show. So before we get into all of that, Victor, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. Just had some dinner, full and ready to go.
Nice. Awesome. Well, let's just jump right in and start discussing this weekend in Detroit, which put together another pretty disappointing weekend of street track racing for us to talk about on the podcast. This time for a bit of a different reason.
Yeah.
So if you didn't watch the race, you didn't miss much. It was a lot of accidents. The track is just not built for the cars that are going around it. The Indy car is too big to go around that track. The IMSA car is too big to go around that track. And because of that, the races just really aren't that interesting because there's lots of accidents, lots of cautions, lots of time spent clearing off the track, and really not a lot of super interesting passing going on. More just people forcing it up the inside and making sure that they get there. And if the other person tries to turn in, then everyone crashes. So tell me what your opinions were on this weekend. Am I right on this track?
Yeah, it's way too small, way too narrow. It's another street track that I don't think deserves to be on the calendar. It's right in front of the GM Renaissance Center, so I'm pretty sure they're just trying to appease Chevy and GM being an IndyCar. That's the only reason why it exists. But just looking at the race, if someone spins out, it causes a pileup of cars. I mean, Will Power in the IndyCar got hit on the first corner and caused a 6-car pileup. Everyone had to stop. It was insane. It was not the greatest race, and with IMSA as well, a lot of the IMSA cars they're endurance cars essentially, and they're big. A lot of them, even though they're, let's say the top class is comparable to an F1 car, that's still too big for this narrow track. So yeah, it did not make for good racing.
Yeah, and this speaks to a larger trend in racing that's been going on, which is when the organizers of F1, IndyCar, or IMSA, or whatever series you're talking about, are looking to build a new racetrack or to bring a new race onto the calendar, they tend to look towards these street circuits because it's easy to get partners that are willing to be a part of the event. If it's in the middle of a busy city, there's lots of hotel accommodation, easy travel. So from that logistic standpoint, you understand why the organizers are picking these locations, but it really degrades the product of the racing that you actually see on the racetrack. It's just not as interesting as when you see a track like Road America, like Mid-Ohio, like Road Atlanta, or some of the beautiful European tracks like Spa or Silverstone. So I think that this is something that the organizers of various racing series across the world, not just IndyCar, are going to look back at this period with a bit of disappointment and realize that maybe the benefits of having a race in the middle of a city don't outweigh the amount that it degrades the actual value of the racing, which ultimately is the reason we do it.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, the States in itself has so many racetracks, like actual racetracks. You mentioned a bunch of them, and there's Laguna Seca, which is one of my favorites. They have so many places to actually race, and most likely have way better races than the street tracks of these cities. It makes it almost impossible to pass, like you said. If someone dives into a corner, someone either has to give up the corner or they crash. So it doesn't make any sense in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so besides the clearly flawed racetrack, just to talk a little bit about what happened in the race, it was a Scott Dixon victory. Once again, Scott Dixon showing us that age really doesn't matter in racing as he pushes up into his mid to early 40s, still super, super competitive. He's along in that club with Fernando Alonso and the likes of drivers that are proving even now, age doesn't matter, and maybe even more now, age doesn't matter in a race car. Um, Aside from that, Kyle Kirkwood had a really good race. He was up in the top for the majority of the race. I just wanted to give him a shout out because he's a really young and up and coming driver that I personally like to watch in the IndyCar series. I think he makes for exciting races. He's really talented. He's got a few wins under his belt now, so that's someone who I wanted to shout out. Do you have any other reactions from the race?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an F1 fan first and foremost, so it's good to see former F1 drivers do pretty well. Marcus Ericsson got P2. Unfortunately, Grosjean got hit. So, but those are the names that I recognize from F1. But in general, it was good to see that. But yeah, not my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So now moving on, we'll talk a little bit about the MotoGP race that happened at Mugello. Talk me through the excitement of that race, especially with the start that Pecco Bagnaia got on the Ducati.
Yeah, I mean, he started P5 on the start. So, but he passed almost everyone and got to P1 and stayed there for the whole race essentially. It was exciting. Right behind him, P3, P4, and then on the last lap, Bestia he came from P4 past P3, and then he passed Jorge Martin into P2. So that was pretty exciting. A lot more exciting than some of the races we've seen recently. And it makes MotoGP is very exciting. I've only gotten into it recently, and it makes for some great racing. The rate like the passing, they're a lot closer to each other. They dive into corners. They're a lot ballsier than you would think being on just this
Mm-hmm.
bike. But yeah, it makes for some great racing. And I got to experience Mugello last year with Ferrari going to Finale Mondiali, and it's a beautiful racetrack with a lot of dips, a lot of camber changes, and they really took advantage of that in the MotoGP race, and it was good to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And anyone that's following the championship will know that because of this double victory in the sprint and the main race that Pecco Bagnaia got, he was able to close the gap to within 20 points to Jorge Martin in first place in the drivers' championship, so to speak, in MotoGP. Um, it's looking like it might be on track for a Ducati three-peat, a Pecco Bagnaia three-peat. This is something that obviously Italians will love. It's going to be make Pecco Bagnaia up there in the ranks with Rossi and the absolute best in MotoGP. So I think that's really exciting, and I'm looking forward to see him taking the rest of the season to Jorge Martin.
Yeah, and Ducati has a lot of news within the league as well. They got a big new sponsor, Lenovo, so you don't see the red bikes anymore. Now it's blue, kind of like Ferrari and HP at the moment, but a lot more with their livery. And then Marquez also is moving to Ducati as well, so that's some big news over there.
Yeah, and I actually saw that Jorge Martin is signed with Aprilia for 2025 on as well.
Nice, that should be fun.
So, yeah, lots of movement in the market.
Yeah.
Speaking of movement in the driver market, that actually feeds perfectly into our next segment, which is discussing this volatile F1 driver market that just kind of got a couple wild cards thrown in. Sergio Perez re-signing until 2026 with Red Bull. Ocon is obviously out at Alpine now on maybe amicable terms, maybe not. It's looking like they maybe took advantage of this situation where they needed to punish him for the race in Monaco and use that to announce what was maybe already going to happen with Ocon leaving at the end of the year. But either way, that is where we're at right now. Before we do our predictions, what's your initial reactions to Perez getting re-signed, to Ocon getting dropped essentially at Alpine?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not a big fan of Perez staying at Red Bull. I don't think he has shown that he can be a great driver at one of the top teams. I mean, he got P2 last year in the championship, but he had some turbulent times. And this year, I mean, he's doing abysmal compared to Max Verstappen. So I don't think it was the right move. We'll have to wait and see whether it actually was. I think that Red Bull's actually just doing it so that they don't have a driver fighting for P1 and Max Verstappen. So it makes their lives a little bit calmer, especially with all the controversy and turbulence surrounding their team this year. So I think that's why they did it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they're trying to ensure some stability with all of this turmoil that's been going on with Horner and the power struggle between Red Bull corporate and Marco with the junior program. I think they really just want a little bit of stability in the team. So talking about stable teams, we've got 4 teams on the grid right now that have fully confirmed lineups for next year. We have Red Bull with Perez and Max. You've got Ferrari with Leclerc and Hamilton coming in from Mercedes next year. You've got the McLaren boys with Piastri and Norris, both secured for the medium to long term on that team. And then you have Aston Martin, where Alonso has a contract. Technically, Lance Stroll is out of a contract, but we all know he's going to be re-signing. It's his dad's team. Unless something crazy happens, it's going to be Lance Stroll and Alonso in that car. So then that leaves us with 6 teams to predict what the future driver lineups are. So I'm going to throw it straight to you, Victor. The first team to talk about is Mercedes. George Russell's got the contract. Who's going to be next to George Russell in that Mercedes seat next year?
So this might be an obvious choice, but I'm hoping that Kimi Antonelli hops into that seat. He's shown in F2 that he's ready, I think, for an F1 seat. He's young, but Max was young and he's still, look at him now, right? So I think that he deserves a seat in F1. It's good to see new talent come in. We've seen Liam Lawson recently come in. We've seen, Ollie Behrman. I think it's time for some new drivers to come in, especially with the whole driver lineup same this year. As so, I'm hoping he goes into that seat. What about you?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that Kimi Antonelli is going to be the driver there in that Mercedes seat, especially because Mercedes probably isn't going to be fighting for a championship until this new regulation is officially in action. This gives them an opportunity to train him up, put him next to George Russell, get them to learn how to work together, get him to learn from George Russell, and have a couple seasons experience under his belt before he takes on that challenge in what I'm sure Mercedes is hoping is going to be once again a car that's able to fight for championships.
Yeah, definitely.
The next team to talk about is Williams. What is your Williams pick?
So Albon, I'm pretty sure is going to be staying. And then for the second seat, I think Bottas might maybe Ocon because he has ties with Toto, but I think Bottas might come back just because he was in Mercedes before, he was in the Williams before, and he's an experienced driver that's won a lot of races. And Williams needs that stability right now, especially with Sargent not being the greatest of drivers and bashing up his car and eating up in their cost cap budget. So I think Sargent will be out and Bottas will come in. It makes the most sense in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah. So for me, this is one of the first parts where we differ. I think that Williams is going to be Carlos Sainz's target for this next year. I think that Sainz is going to be choosing between the Sauber Audi project or Williams, most clearly. And I think ultimately you have to trust that Audi is going to be able to come in and immediately know how to build a good engine and immediately know how to build a car that's competitive for championships. And you also have to be willing to drive around in the back of the grid in what's going to be a very poor driving Sauber until the regulation change comes in. Whereas Williams is a team that has been on the rise, has a new team principal in James Vowles that's highly respected. And it's a team that has shown where you can keep your career alive at Williams. Albon has shown that right now. You don't want to fade into obscurity in F1, and I think that Carlos Sainz is going to be able to find that he can keep that image he has as a successful, talented driver if he stays at Williams. Maybe Williams advances and becomes a top team, and then he's already there. More likely, he continues his reputation, helps them get a little bit better, a little bit closer to the mid pack, and then when a spot opens up at one of the top teams, which inevitably will happen at some point, he'll be able to pounce at that opportunity with a clean report card, so to speak.
Yeah, I see that.
The next team to talk about is going to be Visa Cash App Red Bull Racing, or formerly Scuderia AlphaTauri as we knew it. What do you think the driver lineup's going to be there at RB?
VCarb.
VCarb.
So at VCarb, I think the lineup will stay the same. Just because Yuki has been doing really well. He's definitely outshined Daniel Ricciardo this year. He's gotten some points, a lot more points than Daniel Ricciardo. He's gone to Q3 in qualifying and kept his position. So I think he'll stay there just because of his performance, strictly on merit. So he deserves that seat, I think. Daniel Ricciardo will probably stay because he's really good friends with Christian Horner, and Christian Horner's got his back. There's a whole power struggle happening within Red Bull, and now it looks like Christian Horner has a lot more power than Marco Helmut. And Marco Helmut was really the voice to bring in new talent and kick out talent that he didn't seem fitting for the seat. So with him not really having as much of a voice, I think Christian Horner will just try to keep him in the mix somehow. And he already has a seat in VCarb. So I think he'll stay there.
Okay. Yeah, I don't really know exactly what to say about this situation because it's very clear to me that Yuki should be one of those drivers in that seat. He's definitely earned it. He's outperformed Daniel Ricciardo. I like Daniel Ricciardo as a person. I would love to see him is successful as a driver again, but the fact of the matter is he is getting beat right now by Yuki. So, of the two of them, I think that Yuki should keep that seat. Now, there's obviously been lots of rumors that are pretty veritable sources that say Lawson has a promise that he will have a seat on the grid next year. So one of the two needs to be gone. There are also rumors that say that Ricardo is protected by Christian Horner, and so that might put Ricardo and Lawson together at that. And even though Tsunoda's been the better performing driver, but if I have to make the prediction, I think that ultimately they're going to look at pace, keep Tsunoda, keep him around. He's been there for a while. He provides consistency to that team. He's well liked at this point and well established. And then I think they'll bring Lawson in, and unfortunately, it'll be the end of Daniel Ricciardo's F1 racing career.
I hope so. I'm a big Liam Lawson fan. He showed his wits last year and got some points, and he did really well. I don't think it'll happen though, just because you said Christian Horner is backing Daniel Ricciardo right now, and Marco would be the one voicing support for Liam Lawson, but I don't think it'll happen, unfortunately. One can hope though.
Yeah, one can hope. Absolutely. Okay, the next team to address is going to be the Sauber Future Audi F1 project. We have Nico Hülkenberg moving from Haas to Sauber next year. He's going to stay on as it moves towards Audi F1, and that's already established in his contract. Who's going to be at Sauber with Nico Hülkenberg going forward?
So this is where I think Sainz will pop into. He has history with Audi, especially with dad. Audi is going to be a works team coming from 2026. They've already wholly bought Sauber, so you have to have trust that they have the money, they have the engineering know-how, and they will start building a good car. And so I think it's a good long-term play for Sainz. It might not be good for maybe a year, maybe two, but I think in the long term it should be good. Sainz should be looking for a long-term solution. He's 30 years old, so he has a long time still in F1 he unless he drops off the face of talent, right? But I think he'll do really well. He's shown that he can win races at Ferrari. He's shown that he has the talent needed, and I think he'll do well over there. Right now, Sauber is at the bottom of the list, but it's only up from there, right? So I think it should work.
Okay. Well, obviously, I put signs already in the Williams seat, so I'm going to be sticking with consistency and stability at Sauber, and I'm going to say that they keep Bottas in that Sauber seat until the switchover for Audi comes, at which point he will be given the boot, or maybe he'll get a year to potentially prove himself at Audi. But realistically, I think that they'll keep him as a holdover driver until that Audi project starts. Now, I know that that's not his preference, but I wonder if the seats start getting taken up. Really, the only place I would want to move if I was Bottas would maybe to be in Williams, like you said, maybe Haas, but that's not really much of a move. So I think that continuing on with that Sauber Audi project before it becomes Audi is going to be Bottas's plan for F1. Um, Next, we're going to talk about that Haas team. Tell me who your Haas drivers are. Neither driver confirmed. Obviously, Hulkenberg out, Magnussen not confirmed, had a terrible couple of races, so a lot of rumors about whether or not he'll continue on. Tell me what you think for Haas.
So first and foremost, I think Ollie Behrman will get in there. He's a Ferrari academy driver, so he has ties with Ferrari and Haas. He's already done FP1s or free practices with Haas before, and I think he deserves a seat. He's gotten a few points this year. He's still up in the drivers' championship more than a couple F1 drivers. He's 11th or 12th. So I think he deserves it. He's also pretty friendly with them. I mean, I've seen him around the Ferrari property, in the canteen at the lunchroom. I've seen him, joking around with the Ferrari employees and also the Haas employees. And he's done tests at Fiorano, so I think he is perfectly suited to be at Haas, especially if he wants to get into Ferrari later. It gives him some experience and practice going forward. He won't get into Ferrari right away. Just looking at the driver lineup, Leclerc and Hamilton are too strong of a lineup for them to just drop. So I think he'll fit well there. For the second driver, I think this is where Ocon slots in. He's an experienced driver, and I think it'll pair well with a newcomer into the sport. So hopefully he plays ball and he's nicer to his teammate next year than this year. But uh, I think they might just be looking at him just for the experience sake. And he is a free driver or free agent next year, so it opens it up for that.
Yeah, I think that I couldn't agree more. I think it's going to be Behrman and Ocon. I think Ocon is too good to not be on the grid, or at least to not be considered for one of these seats over some of these people coming up out of F2. Obviously, there is some talent out there, but realistically, Ocon has much more experience, and experience is so valuable in F1. So I think he'll slot in there. I think that Ferrari wants to get Behrman a seat as soon as possible, especially after he had such a great race stepping in for Sainz when he had his surgery. So I think that Behrman is pretty much a lock for that seat. I think Ocon and Behrman is probably the best future for Haas as well, because they're trying to clear the reputation or clear the business of decisions that were made by Gunther Steiner, change the culture of the team, I think, a little bit. And this would be the perfect way to do it. Clear out that driver lineup and put in a fresh new face and also an experienced veteran that needs to maybe revive his reputation a little bit. And Haas could be the right place to do it.
You never know. We
So
might get K Mag and Ocon on the same team and just have carnage.
wouldn't that be the best season for all of us? We could get some bowling at turn one and maybe some crazy race results. Okay, so then now we've covered all of the teams except for the one that started all of this drama this weekend, at least, which would be Alpine F1. Gasly now feeling pretty secure in that seat. Obviously, he's looking like he's going to be their number one driver moving forward, unless something crazy happens. Who do you think that number two driver is going to be at Alpine?
I think Jack Doohan will probably get that seat. This weekend in Canada, he's doing FP1. So I think that's them testing to see where he's at, how comfortable he's in the car. They've also kept him around as a reserve driver. He's not an F2 anymore. He's shown that he can do well in a racing seat. And he's been a good support for them. I mean, he's doing interviews, he's going to events for them. So I think he slots in well over there. And also, it's good to see new faces, new talent coming in, and just giving new people a seat if they deserve it. So I think he'll go into there.
Yeah, I think that would be nice. Obviously, it would add some value to the Alpine Young Driver program, which was pretty terrible, with Piastri leaving before Alpine gave him a seat, or rather, when they gave him a seat towards McLaren. Guan Yu Zhou was in that program and ended up leaving for the Alfa Romeo Sauber seat. So I think that would be nice to get the Alpine Young Driver in there. I personally, though, think that they're going to opt for a little bit more of a wild card choice. I think they're going to opt for Mick Schumacher, who's been racing for them in WEC in their hypercar program. Um, he's been in F1 before. Obviously, did not have a great run at Haas, but that was when Haas was one of the worst teams. I mean, his first season, his rookie season, when it was him and Mazepin, that car was literally not developed at all for the entire season. Obviously, his second season, he crashed a lot, which was the reason they didn't keep him on. But Bruno Famin has talked a lot about Schumacher's maturity, his teamwork, especially in an endurance racing format where teamwork is pivotal. And he's done a ton of simulation work for Mercedes and obviously has been spoken highly of by Toto Wolff. Although one would question, if it was so great, then why wouldn't Toto just put him in that other Mercedes seat? But obviously that's not going to happen. Um, I just think that he provides some stability and teamwork. He's someone who's always going to do what the team needs, and he would be a good second fiddle to Gasly in that Alpine team. So I think he's going to get that seat.
Yeah, and I mean, you see him just hanging around the paddock with Toto. He's definitely has a presence there, and that could be a possibility for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that rounds out our Formula One predictions for who's going to be on the grid next year. Obviously, all of this can change. The F1 driver market is extremely volatile, as always. So we never know until this summer, really, what the idea is going to be, or rather, till the off season, this winter, what the grid is going to be. But I look forward to look back at these reactions when we do see how much we were right and how much we were wrong, and what wild cards come out.
Yeah, definitely.
So, next topic of discussion, moving into the automotive section of this podcast, is going to be the death of the Geneva Auto Show. So, I'm just going to start by reading a quick quote, a few different sentences from the organizers about why they're canceling the show. Um, they say there are too many uncertainties linked to the automotive industry and the eroded attractiveness of the major European shows to take the risk of investing further into the future, that there's a lack of interest shown by the manufacturers in Germany and in France, and that they would rather do the Munich and Paris shows for the domestic market, and that the investment levels required to continue the Geneva Auto Show just wouldn't be worth it. And that, quote, the market conditions in Europe are not conducive to the success of future editions of the Geneva show. Talk to me about your reaction to the news and that explanation as well to why the show is going to be canceled.
I mean, I'm sure they've done the research. That's why they released that quote. But the European market, the auto market, is pretty big. It's, that this is where most of the automakers come from. So it gives them a chance to show off their new models to the public without pressure to buy, and people can test them, try them, touch them, sit inside. So it's a shame, really. Geneva historically has been where all the supercars are shown, so it's a little bit different. But I mean, that's where all the cool stuff comes out, especially as a young teenager, being a car enthusiast. That I always used to look forward to reading on what comes out at the Geneva Auto Show, because that's where all the crazy exciting stuff is happening, right? So it is a shame. I do understand it in a sense. During my undergrad, we did a auto show run by the students, and it was a major auto show on the Canadian circuit. So we actually had to go to the OEMs and go and convince them to spend money and have a booth at our auto show. It minimum was probably about $50,000, and that's for a small booth. So I can see why they're saying that. It costs them a lot of money, and there might not be a huge or an immediate return on investment, but it does give them presence to the people, and it lets people see everything without pressure, like I said before. So I, I think it's a shame personally. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a shame as well. I got some of my first exposure to the automotive industry beyond posters on my wall, going to the New York Auto Show with my brother when I was a kid. And I think the auto shows provided people a really good opportunity to see some of these cars that they've been dreaming of seeing their entire lives. I mean, the first time I ever saw a Bugatti Veyron was there at the New York Auto Show. But at the same show, I also saw the model of Subaru that was coming out that year that I would ultimately end up wanting. That was the 2013 WRX, which is one of my favorite cars of all time. You see a lot of more quote unquote regular cars and get some exposure to that, which I think is really valuable for the industry to create fans out of these cars. Now, this news has been accompanied by a trend in automotive media in the last couple of years to talk about the death of the auto show as a whole. So, do you think that the Geneva Auto Show is a sign that the auto show and the auto convention as a whole is dying in the industry? Or do you think that it's more of a one off and that some of these other shows are going to continue?
I really hope not. Throughout my career, I've worked at plenty of auto shows for manufacturers and for other marketing teams. So I've worked at the Toronto Auto Show. I've been to Detroit to that show. I've been to, a lot of different auto shows, and it's exciting. It always feels like it's the time of the year where you can go see some of the people in the industry, where you can go have fun and go see the cars that you don't usually get to see, right? So it's different seeing cars in the flesh or in the paint than in pictures or online or anything like that. So it would be a shame, but I really hope it doesn't signal a big downturn. I know that there are automakers that are just pulling out of every show because they don't see the return on investment. They want to do their own thing with their own marketing dollars, and they have control over it, and which makes sense. But it does leave a little bit of a hole in the whole scheme of things, right? So I I really hope not.
Yeah, one example of an automaker that is pulling out of these shows is Stellantis. They don't have any of their brands in the auto show. Obviously, they're discontinuing a lot of their most exciting cars, the stuff that they would be showing off in the auto show, which is a whole nother conversation that we need to have at some point. But that leaves a gap, for example, with the New York Auto Show, and I think quite a few other auto shows. Jeep used to have an exhibition where you would be able to test the suspension capabilities going over some rough surfaces, and then it would show the climbing capability driving up, for example, maybe a 45-degree incline or something along those lines. That's something I did when I was a young kid that got me really excited about the Jeep Wranglers, got me really excited about off-roading vehicles. I think that's something that it is going to be sadly missed. I've heard that at some shows Ford has stepped in with the Bronco to do those type of exhibitions. I think there's value in the auto show in that it's interactive and we see everything on our phones and on TV nowadays. But if you go to the auto show, you can feel it, you can touch it. A lot of the cars, other than the super exclusive ones that let you sit in it, see the interior, there are some auto shows that are doing test track courses so you can drive some EVs to determine whether you want to switch from combustion to EV and get the feel for it. And I think all of that is extremely valuable, and I think that until I mean, really, there's going to be no point when people don't want to physically see the cars that they're buying. It's such an important purchase, probably the second most important purchase that anybody is ever going to make, besides their house, is going to be their car. So you want to feel it, you want to touch it, you want to see it, and the auto show gives you an opportunity to do that. So I too think it's not going to be the end of the auto show, although things may change and the way auto shows look, the types of OEMs and the types of vendors that are there may change, but there's a value in it for the industry, and I don't think you can just dismiss that.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. It does bring excitement, and for kids too, right? They're not allowed to drive, right? So this is one of the only ways that they can interact with a car other than their parents buying something or their friends having something, right? So there's been a couple of examples I can give you that really saw kids, getting really excited, and hopefully it brings more automotive enthusiasts in the future. So I worked for Nissan at 1 year at the Toronto Auto Show, and they had the GTR open so people
Mm.
can, and you see kids flipping out, going like, "Holy! I can't believe I can sit in this thing!" And they're touching the steering wheel, and it's something that was really cool to see. And another thing I saw is at our college auto show in Barrie, Ontario, Pfaff from Pfaff Motorsports. They own a few Porsche dealerships. They brought they always brought in a car for a drift track. We used to get the firefighters actually. We had a firefighter course at our school, and they used to soak the track with a hose. And they used to get either a 911 or a Boxster or a Cayman, and used to donate some money to charity. And then they used to bring you and yeah, drift along the track, which was great for kids. That's something that they don't get to experience otherwise, right? And I got to experience something at SEMA, which is also something I want to bring up. But I got to do an autocross course in the C7 Z06 Corvette. So, that's something that you don't get to do very often, right? So, these are interactive things that let people enjoy the automobile as a whole, right? Get really enthusiastic about it. And to bring up SEMA again, that's a show just for the industry, and it's all aftermarket stuff. So I think shows like that will continue to exist, and vendors, third party vendors, will also come to these shows to show off their products because they're not as famous as the OEMs. Some have made their name well known, but a lot of them don't. So this is a good opportunity for them to show their products, show that how much of an industry the third party market is, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. I think that it's going to be really interesting to see the future of this market and see how it changes and see what shows look like 5, 10 years down the line. Because obviously these shows are really important to automotive history as well. And that's a very, very clear transition, if you didn't notice, towards our next topic, which is going to be our draft for this week. And this is really all about automotive history and looking back at the Geneva Auto Show. So many amazing cars were released at the Geneva Auto Show through automotive history. Some of the best supercars, sports cars, and cars in general were released at that show. So our draft this week are going to be the four best for each of us cars that were released at the Geneva Auto Show throughout the history of the show. I'm going to take the first pick this week since you got the first pick last week.
Yeah.
And my first pick is going to be at the 1949 Geneva Auto Show, the Porsche 356 Roadster. Really, the car that started it all for Porsche, led to the iconic design imagery that they still use in their 911s, and really just set the tone for Porsche as a brand as a whole. Tell me what you think about that pick.
Yeah, I mean it's a great. It's the genesis of Porsche essentially. I mean you could still see the clear lineage from the Beetle to that car, so it shows off. It's a great example of how Geneva sparks um, the genesis of a certain car or a certain company, right? So it does show how important the show is.
Yeah.
So I'll go on to my first pick here, and it will be the from the 1966 Geneva Auto Show. It'll be the Lamborghini Miura. The actual rolling chassis was shown off the year previously at the Turin Auto Show in Italy, but this is the full body design, designed and penned by Marcello Gandini, one of my favorite designers. But it was also the genesis of the mid-engine car, the mid-engine sports car for the public, essentially, that you can drive on the road. There were racing cars with mid-engine configurations, but this is the first that you could drive on the road. And it did spark a revolution for supercars and for Lamborghini as a whole. Lamborghini had the 350 and 400 GT before, but they were touring cars, front engine. They weren't really known for that when we look back. But the Miura sparked the rest of their lineage up until now. So I think that'll be my top pick for sure.
I think that's a great top pick. The car that started it all for the supercar industry. My second pick is going to be a car that Enzo Ferrari once described as the most beautiful car in the world. Released at the 1961 Geneva Auto Show, the Jaguar E-Type. Obviously, one of the most beautiful British cars ever created. Um, a timeless classic that has literally been in MoMA. I saw it at the automotive exhibition there about 2 years ago. One of the most beautiful cars that's ever been made, and I think the most beautiful car that's ever come out of the UK. Tell me what you think about that one.
Yeah, that definitely deserves a spot there. It's an iconic car, and it's still a car that people remember Jaguar for. So every time you see one, it stops you in the streets. So, and fun, just a funny side note, I have a friend back home in Toronto that actually learned to drive a car, like he learned to drive in an E-Type that his grandpa owns. So, right? So it's
Don't we all wish that that was our lives?
yeah. Shout out to Coach.
Awesome. Well, give us your second pick, Victor.
So my second pick will be the 1970 Alfa Romeo Montreal. The prototype was shown a few years earlier in 1967 in Montreal, Canada. So, being a Canadian, it holds close to my heart the fact that it's named after a Canadian city. But the irony is that it was never sold in Canada or North America. It's strictly a European car. And it's one of my favorite designs, which is also penned by Marcello Gandini. So two Gandini cars here, but it's iconic with it looks almost like an Italian or European muscle car in a sense. And it also has some of the coolest headlight covers. They're like little rakes, let's say, almost like sunglasses that pop up. And a 2-liter V8. I love small displacement, large cylinder count engines. They don't make them like that, so it's still one of my favorites.
Yeah, I think that's an extraordinary pick for sure. It's not what I would have picked in my second pick, but I think I respect it. I understand the Canadian connection, so I'll give you that one. My third pick in this draft is going to be a beautiful Ferrari. Of course, you got to always throw it back to the Italians. It's going to be one of my favorite Ferraris ever made, the successor to the Ferrari F40, the Ferrari F50, released in the 1995 Geneva Auto Show. Obviously, extreme styling, extreme air ducting and aero, 3.5 liter V12 engine inspired by the 1990 Formula One car. Just an absolute beast. A lot of people prefer the F40 to the F50. I'm probably one of those rare few that actually prefer the F50 to the F40. And that's a whole nother debate that I know me and Victor sit on opposite sides of before we even talk about this. But that's going to be my third pick.
Yeah, no, it's a very cool car. I like it mostly for its drivetrain rather than the styling of the car. It has an F1 derived layout of the engine being a stress member for the chassis. So everything's bolted directly to it. And I don't know if you've ever seen anyone try to do a clutch change on it, but you really have to split the car in half just to get to the clutch. So it's a really cool car. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, so my third pick is a little bit of a double whammy here. So it's I'm bending the rules just a slight bit, but it's
Just a little bit.
yeah, two-thirds of the Holy Trinity in 2013. So this is when the hybrid hypercars came out. So this would be the McLaren P1 and the Ferrari LaFerrari coming out the 2013 Geneva Auto Show. I'm not picking a specific car because to me it's the moment. It's the fact that they brought out two hybrid cars at the same time that were at the top of the automotive food chain, let's say. So it sparked the new wave of hybrid supercars that are continuing now all the way to the Lamborghini Revuelto that just came out. So this was 11 years prior, and it really showed the way that the industry is moving. So I think that's just an iconic moment in time that the Geneva Auto Show let us experience.
Yeah, definitely twisting the rules a bit, but I will totally accept it because the Holy Trinity is something you don't want to mess with, and you really we don't want to start putting one over the other yet. We can talk about that another time and talk about which of the best are of the three in the Holy Trinity, but clearly two super influential cars in today's world in really showing what the future of the automotive industry is going to be with these hypercars and supercars as the EU and US moves towards electrification requirements. As you and I know, all of that stuff is going to be continually delayed as politics works its way through the system. And the one way car companies are going to continue to get to create beautiful combustion engine cars is by pairing them with these hybrid drive systems. So that truly was a look into the future when they released those two cars.
Yeah.
Um, so my last and final pick is going to be one of my favorite drivers' cars. Not necessarily a hypercar or a supercar, but it's going to be the Porsche 928. It was the first ever V8 Porsche, the only ever front engine V8 Porsche ever made. It was actually originally introduced. Yes, it's a true fact.
No, there's the Panamera and there's a Cayenne.
That's not a. Oh, yeah, Cayenne's not a Porsche. Yeah, we can talk Porsches all day. A Cayenne's not a Porsche.
Panamera's got V8 though. Just saying.
Is that technically front engine?
Yeah,
I I guess I thought it was front mid engine.
yeah, it's front engine.
Okay, okay, so correct. I was wrong, but it is the first front engine V8. I am absolutely right on that. It was the first V8 they ever produced. And aside from that, I just think it's a beautiful car. I love the rounded off rear end. I love the kind of sunken eyes headlights that are in the front. I think it's the engine bay. Look at the engine bay in one of those cars. It's a very cool looking V8 with the gold intake plenums. So I think that all in all, it's just a car I really like. Car that I'm happy was made. It was released to be the successor to the 911, and obviously that didn't happen for good cause. But it's a great car that deserves to be on this list.
Yeah, it definitely caused an uproar once they announced that it was supposed to be the replacement, but I'm glad that they didn't replace it. The 928 definitely has a place in its own history. The rear end is nice and round, right? So it's a really cool design.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
My last pick
yeah, give us your last pick.
will be I'm also going to bend the rules a little bit here. It's a racing car, the Porsche 917 in 1969. So it's one of the most successful race cars, one of Porsche's most successful race cars, and Porsche is one of the most successful racing manufacturers. So it definitely deserves a spot on the list, I think. It was one of Fernand Piech's first automotive achievements, so it it holds a lot of first, and I think it deserves a spot just because of how great it was, and it looks fantastic in my opinion too.
Yeah, that's a great choice. Definitely bending the rules again. Next week, I'm gonna have to think about how I can bend the rules to get a leg up in this draft because I think you may have me beat here with the Holy Trinity and one of the best racing cars in existence in your list. But I'll give it to you. I think that this was a really really great draft. Tell me about some honorable mentions that you have before we go.
So one of the honorable mentions would be the Bugatti Chiron. So that came out in the 2016 Geneva Auto Show to replace the Veyron. We talked about it last episode, but I mean, it is coming to an end, and I think it's a landmark in automotive engineering and design. So I think that deserves an honorable mention there. And last but definitely not least, the Countach prototype in 1971. So this was before the car got released, uh, the production version at least. The Mira was still in production at that time, and it's such an iconic design. You know, when people think of Lamborghini, one of the first things to think about is the Countach. So it's so crazy looking that even its name was a slang swear word in Italian. So it's one of those cars that goes down in history and it can never be forgotten. And the Geneva Auto Show brought us that the excitement of another supercar in that sense. So it definitely deserves a spot on the list there.
Yeah, I totally agree. Released as the LP 500 at the auto show, not even yet named the Countach. It's a really cool prototype to look at. It almost does look like a little bit boxier, a little bit more awkward than the Countach, which ultimately was so sleek and slim and beautiful. But it showed you exactly what Lamborghini was going to do with the rest of their company throughout history with the sharp angles and the lines and all of the triangular shapes and making it almost look like a fighter jet. That really all comes from that original prototype. So that's a great call out.
Yeah.
Um, the Chiron and the LP500 were both going to be honorable mentions for me. So you leave me with one last honorable mention. And this is the only car that we're talking about today that is not a supercar or a sports car or any type of a performance vehicle in the traditional sense of word. And that's going to be the Range Rover Classic, which was released in the 1970 Geneva Auto Show, really touted as a car that could do anything. You could take it off road in the desert, or you could take it down a fancy street in London. And it was really meant to do both a mix of luxury and off road, something that has become all too common in some of the SUVs and trucks that are out today, whether you're talking about pickup trucks now that cost $130,000 with big fancy leather seats. But the Range Rover was really the first that did that luxury truck segment. So I think that it deserves a spot as well on this list.
Yeah, it was definitely a pioneer in its time, way before SUVs became popular. And it's something that, you know, it sparked another revolution, right? There's other SUVs that came out afterwards, but that's definitely the original uh, SUV that you could drive to the shops and come back. It's the car that the farmers could have on their lawn or on their farm, and then go to the shops with their wives. So I think it definitely deserves a spot there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that rounds out our discussion of the best cars from the Geneva Auto Show. As you can tell, we're sad about this show going away. If anything, just because of that amazing list of cars and the history that's come from this show. These are some of the best cars ever created, some of the most important historical cars ever made. And it's just sad to think that these cars, obviously, they're still going to get made, they'll still get announced, but they won't be able to be associated with that same historic show. And unfortunately, the name might fade into the history books one day where people just look at these cars and see, oh, it was released at the Geneva Auto Show. I wonder what that was. Sad to think about, but that's how it's going. And obviously, we can still show respect to these amazing vehicles that were introduced and what this show was for the many years before, unfortunately, the pandemic and economic situations forced it to close.
Yeah, definitely. And looking at some historical pictures, you can see, pioneers of their time, whether it's today's Koenigsegg or Pagani. You can see pictures of them standing next to their own car with their own name on it, proudly on display. And then all these cars that we talked about, and countless other ones that weren't on our list, but they definitely deserve, to show respect in the sense that they came to the show, they showed off what they're capable of, their engineering and their design and everything. And the Geneva was a good hub and it was always good looking out for what's going to come next. Being an automotive enthusiast, you always look forward to reading what's happening at the Geneva Auto Show, seeing what's new and exciting. So it'll definitely be missed.
Absolutely. So before we finish off this episode, I just want to first thank everyone that listened to the first episode, everyone that just listened to this episode. I want to thank our editor, Devin, who's going to be adding some photo graphics to show a little bit more about what we're talking about when we talk about these cars on our YouTube channel. Please go on YouTube and subscribe, On Track, Off Track Podcast. We're also on Spotify, iTunes podcasts, and anywhere else that you might get a podcast. So thank you all again for listening. Victor, do you have any last thoughts before we sign off for the week?
No, just also thanks to everyone that's supported and given great messages of support, and everyone that's listening. We're only doing this because we're enthusiasts and we have a lot of opinions and views about things. But I'm sure people are interested and they're gonna have fun listening. So thank you guys.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next weekend.
Thanks. Bye.